Alright, this time here we're going to look into something that's been known about for a long time but been verified a few times, and here recently we've had a little bit more info going on it, and just thought I'd share it with you. It's the instance of what we call the cocaine mummies, and it's an anomaly because it involves the guy you see here, Ramses the Great, and I don't know if you can make it out here. It's kind of a dark picture still, but in this picture you can tell he's got his alkaline nose and very Greco-Roman, and his balding spot on top, very kind of that same kind of mode that you always see in all the Greeks with his curly-ish type hair, and it's kind of a blondish red, and they say that he was almost 90 years old or around there whenever he had died, and they dyed his hair henna to take it back to his original color. And so they checked his hair, and sure enough, under a microscope, it shows up, yeah, he was a redhead whenever he was younger and stuff. Ramses and Sete was, and in fact, there's stories of the ancient burial grounds that they have that are in some of the areas that the necropolises, if you will, and they have bodies separated in different color of hair. It's odd. They have blonde-haired people in one area, red-headed in another, and all the dark-hairs over in another area, and it's kind of separated in different type of areas and stuff. And they're known that Seti are Sethites, and Seth, the ancient god that they have of it, which correlates to Typhon, if you will. That all goes along with the same idea. So let's look into this mysterious cocaine mummies. Do they prove ancient voyages between Egypt and the Americas? Now, evidence which shows that ancient Egyptians had already crossed the Atlantic 3,000 years ago, long before Columbus in 1492, comes not only from the mimicking of cultural traditions as seen in Peru and the Canary Islands, where the evidence of trepanning and mummification has been found, but from the actual Egyptian mummies themselves. Now, incredibly, in 1976, Dr. Michel Lescott from the Museum of Natural History in Paris received a sample from the mummified remains of Egyptian pharaohs Ramses the Great. And she was given them to study. Using the electron microscope, she discovered grains of tobacco clinging to the fiber of his bandages. In fact, she didn't have to use an electron microscope. They were pretty much visible. They've taken pictures of them and so on, too. And they found other mummies that now have found almost leaves that are inside of there and pieces of it and stuff and everything. It looked like they may have helped to use it for some type of disinfecting properties, and indeed tobacco can be shoved in a wound in some cases and things. But no, these people have high levels in their body. They've been smoking. And one study that they showed out of like 12 people, like 7 of them had smoking levels looked like they were a modern day smoker. And a couple of them were very high, like they were chain smokers, and there was only like 4 of them that weren't out of the group, or 5, I think. Yeah, 5 totally, but one of them was like an infant child that was 3. The other one was 6. There was one that was 12, and he was a smoker, by the way. And then there was only a couple of people that were up in their ages that actually were not smokers in this one group that they had looked at. Now, I think they just decided to make them quit looking at for these type of things because it just rose too many eyebrows and too much questions. So the initial discovery was berated by the authorities of her senior colleagues, and they insisted that she had simply observed a contamination from other modern sources, maybe from some old archaeologist smoking a pipe in the vicinity and whoopsie, or perhaps she had found the traces of a workman's sneeze. Tobacco first came to Europe from South America during the time of Columbus, 2,700 years later, ruling out the possibility of tobacco being present during the reign of Ramses circa 1213 BC. I mean, logic will tell you that right there, that how could they possibly have that? And they've tried, botanists, all kinds of things to find plants that would match up. They would give them a nicotine and things like that to do, and they have found a few small-eyed sources and nothing that really they could have possibly used. It looks very conspicuous, but worse than that, they have found cocaine inside of them. And then now I've even heard somebody try to say, well, maybe they were having cocaine parties back in England whenever they used to mess with the mummies and do the unwrapping parties, and they sneezed on a mirror and blew it all over the mummy and stuff, and it's like, no, it's from internal tissues and so on. So we had to go through tests and stuff again, and they did it again. Now, some years later, Dr. Svelta Balabanova, a forensic toxicologist at the Institute of Forensic Medicine at ULM, followed up on Dr. Lescott's findings with yet more intriguing evidence. In order to eliminate the possibility of contemporary contamination, Dr. Balabanova obtained samples of intestinal tissues from inside of Ramses' body, rather than the external layers of skin and cloth, and to much her amazement, she discovered traces of cannabis, coca, and tobacco laid down in his body cells like rings on a tree, she said, like somebody that was a pretty frequent user. That's what you would find in somebody like that. So it's quite strange. And this is her back in the day, and years before she had found them, I guess. And you can see her working on mummies at the time and stuff. And here's a picture of ancient Egyptians in the background. Strangely, she's got one of the pictures where the workers have a blonde hair and a blonde haired guy on them too, but a couple of dark hairs there. But so her fellow researchers still, it was not enough proof to, despite her excellent reputation, and she had developed a very good reputation and knew what she was doing and how to make a clean room and all these type things, and she had triple checked herself before she had even attempted to say something along this line. But such evidence contradicted conventional explanations of intercontinental contact thousands of years in the past. But a decade later, in 1992, 7 ancient Egyptian mummies were flown from the Cairo Museum to Munich for further example or analysis. Dr. Balabanova conducted a series of gas chromatograph tests on the samples of 7 mummies, of which one of which was the mummified remains of Hinat Tawi. She's known as the Lady of the Two Lands, and she's a priestess who lived sometime during the reign of the 21st dynasty, and she has a famous tomb and all this. Anyhow, and so it was around 1000 BC whenever she was active. Each individual revealed the presence of nicotine and cocaine, and both the mummies and the results deemed entirely credible, which is strange. So you look at some of these mummies here and Akhenaten and the things that were going on back then during this time. Hinat Tawi, the Lady of Two Lands, she had this effect. Ramses had this effect, and there's they did a test on like 16 of them, and like 7 of them showed up to have it, and somebody else who was Manchester did it on the mummies that they currently had, and that showed up to be a high instance of the same situation again. And all of them were double checked and done with a clean room, and then they rinse the samples and do all these crazy things with their hair to make sure that there's no contamination whatsoever, and go off of that. And the number that's showing up is such a high number too. It's not like there could be this minute. No, it's not a minute thing either. It rivals the same amount found in the mummies that you find in Peru and Andes Mountains and stuff. And know they're pretty hopped up on it whenever it happens. And so let's time to warm up to the ancient intercontinental travel idea, okay? Because it may be therefore implied that Egypt obtained these plants in trade with far-flung urbanity from all over the ancient world, wrote the author researcher Dr. Alexander Sumak. Prepare to warm up to the plausible notion of intercontinental cultural contact that was either sustained or else in play some extent during every phase of human history. And I think it goes on a little past that. Whenever they look at the mummies, they go over like a 1200 year period from some 600 BC to all the way back to the early ones you saw there, which 12 something. It's over 600 years in that span, and I'm not sure the Munich ones. And somebody else did a set on some of the heads that they had, because they have hair, and they've already got groups of those hair samples already set aside, so they just pulled a little out and did it with those and so on. And it's strange, it just keeps pegging here. So we'll go on to other discussions that correlate to this, though. But Professor Martin Banal, a historian at Cornell University, is one of the many scholars who conceded that ancient trade links which vastly predate present calculations must have existed. We're getting more and more evidence of world trade at an earlier stage. Besides, he's not alone in his hypothesis. More details of transoceanic contact can be found in my latest book, The Myth of Man. So this guy's kind of promoting his book too. But at the same time, they also found silk threads in a few of these mummies that they found, and I believe Ramses even one of them. That shows you the silk trade road went a long, long time before. And where did he get this silk from? And who were these ancient Proto-Indo-Europeans that stretched all the way up into that area and got him some silk? How did this go down? I think it went down much like you're thinking right now. But history tells us that on September 20th, 1519, Ferdinand Magellan set out from the coast of Spain with his expedition, intent on being the first man in recorded history to successfully circumnavigate the globe, or the world, by sea. Despite many sources claiming that he did succeed in that immense task, the truth of this tale states that having become embroiled in a local war, Magellan was killed during a battle in April 27, 1521. Now, according to historical accounts, it was his personal slave, Enrique of Malacca, who ultimately succeeded where his master had failed and managed to navigate the vast ocean the entire way around the rest of the way. Isn't that amazing? So he's Enrique of Malacca. So see if we can find some history on that. But history speaks of many ancient crossings of both the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans long before that, though, in the past, but evidence has come to light which extends the timeline of these activities thousands of years beyond accepted present figures. The Manu people reached Pitcairn Island in ancient times. Pitcairn Island is associated volcanic formation which lies 1,350 miles southeast of Tahiti in the Pacific Ocean, out in the middle of nowhere. It was first officially sighted in 1767. The population of Pitcairn today is made up of descendants from survivors of the 215-ton Royal Navy transport ship, the HMS Bounty, which was the victim of a dramatic mutiny in 1789 by master's mate Fletcher Christian, and I think we might know the story of the mutiny on the Bounty, who ultimately led to his fellow mutineers to the island before disembarking, then burning the famous ship. Here they established what they must have believed to have been the first colony in such a remote spot. But they weren't the first. And here's an artist's rendition of the island and its little mountain peaks and how small the area was and the tropical center of the island and so on that they talked about. Now, a view of Pitcairn Island South Seas area in 1820, a rock inscription written in the Libyan dialect of ancient Egypt was reportedly discovered on Pitcairn Island that read, "Our crew, wrecked in a storm, made land, thank God. We are people from the Manu region. We worship Ra. In accordance with the scripture, we behold the sun and give voice." And is this the tale of the ancient mariner? Is this the shipwrecked sailor? That the story that goes about that actually correlates with Atlantis and things going down and an ancient storm that took over an island and he ended up on this place? Is that got anything to do with it? It talks about this giant storm fire that comes down out of the sky and boom, and something, and it lets you know something had happened that kicked it off. Anyhow, Manu is a highland area of Libya. It's in between Egypt and the Libyan desert right there. And so the question remains, how does such a distant travelers reach these shores in ancient Egyptian times, and why has this particular piece of evidence been ignored ever since? It's because officially no sailors ever crossed the Pacific that far back in history. So everybody wants to try to write it off. Yet here we see an ancient boat. It's a Sumerian Reed Boat, and it's pitched on the tail and pitched on the tip real hard. Got the rudders on it. It's got it, and they have all these that have the ancient sails already in check on them. Before that, it was a planking set that grabbed the wind, and they could directionalize it. Now that was completed in 2008. It was a recreation, though, that sailed the Red Sea to Punt 3,800 years ago by Queen Hatshepsut. It looks like the one that was from that. Now, John L. Sorensen and Carl L. Johansson studied evidence from archaeology, historical and linguistic sources, ancient art, and conventional botanical studies, which revealed conclusive evidence that nearly 100 species of plants, a majority of them cultivars, were present in both eastern and western hemispheres prior to Columbus's first journey to the Americas. And they can't tell you that it connects because of whenever we were hooked it back at Pangea, because that's so far back that the plants that they're talking about don't exist. In fact, the plants don't exist. And for them to have had convergence happen out of the primordialness is quite far-fetched. We don't see it in very many places, enough to even think that it's even a possibility. But what is a possibility is somehow some of this was being transposed. There's a lot of funny things about that. Tomatoes and a few things, they're like, what? Their research paper, Scientific Evidence for Pre-Columbian Transoceanic Voyage, explains that many plant species, over half of which were considered flora of American origin that spread to Eurasia or Oceania, can only have been distributed to foreign shores via transoceanic voyages led by ancient mariners. Or you can stick some to a bird and it doesn't unstick from the bird till he lands on the other side. Seeds, things like that. I mean, there's been some strange conjecture. This distribution below could not have been due to merely natural transfer mechanisms, nor can it be explained by early human migrations to the New World that we know of via the Bering Strait route, state the authors. And if you look at this picture here, let's see how well it shows up in there. That what we're looking at here is the ancient shoreline around 20,000 years ago before the last ice age, and how huge the shoreline would have been yellow. You can see the part here where it breaks apart and you end up getting all the islands in between, and how this runs out and becomes Shimia, and you get into the Sea of Okhotsk right here. But the original people coming into the peopling of Beringia here, we have found that there's Caucasians, not an Amerindian species that predates that. I did a video not too long ago that had come in here some 16,000 years before, and they found them off here in Alaska coming down into Canada, and they predate anybody so far that they found coming through. So it finally validates something that we kind of knew to be true a long time ago because of the ancient stories that they had. How would they have these gods that were pale-skinned and blue-eyed and have beards and stuff like the ancient Aztecs talked about whenever they showed up? It just it doesn't make sense that they would come up with something like that whenever they themselves don't even grow beards or anything, and it doesn't look like any of the people that were around at the time had any facial hair growing whatsoever. So it shows you that there's this initial peopling coming in, though, but then there's a back migration of 1A that comes in here. And then there's also a back migration of C1A that comes out of here that's slightly different in two separate peoples that's later. And then a later arrival of HGD2 and spread of D2A down into the Americas, part 4. And this part 4 that we're looking at is what we've always called 1, and it's Clovis. But now they're looking at it, no, this was this whole little back and forth thing that went on twice, and there was this people before that, because how did you get back and forth if you didn't go? So that's gene flow, though, and that's according to about a 2007 update there. But then now if they added the new one in that I just talked about, they'd have to go, here's that first one, and I want to stress that's not the first one necessarily. Everybody, when they find one, they want to say, and this is the very first, and this is the very first wheel, and this is the very first. No, it's the earliest one known. It's not the earliest ever. It's not the first one ever. Probably, surely not. But also, they could go back hundreds of years farther. We've tried to put ourselves in a box by saying this is the earliest. No, this is not the earliest. This is the earliest known currently. You have to go with that type of thing, and it still has prestige. Anyhow, it had to be ancient transatlantic voyages. Sorensen and Johansen claimed that the only possible explanation for these findings is that a considerable number of transatlantic voyages in both directions across both major oceans were completed between the 7th millennium BC and the European Age of Discovery. So, quite a span here that they figure it must have happened. Okay, and so these are like the ancient Sumerian Reed Boats I'm talking about and what they look like. There's a lot of different styles of them. This is one of them that seems somewhat of a smaller version, but it just depends on how you scale it up. These can be quite huge. In fact, you can scale it up to something that looks like the barge that you see here, and it has a house on it. quite a lot are seen there, all the way down to a little two-man fishing type thing that could be hooked up together. Sandal technology and so on. And sure enough, they had sails they'd hooked to them. In early days, it looked something like a one of those ancient rattan little shades that you used to put up and stuff. But later there was canvas and using of weaving and things and separate stuff. And you can see all here, it's pretty much all the same design and taking up to another point. Oh, here we have the cool sandals and stuff, which Egypt really didn't use the sandals as much as Sumerian did, and that's another connection they have there. And you can see these giant reed boats that they make too, that are the size of this little houseboat thing here. Terrible picture, but maybe you get the idea, and the massive size of them. Let's look at this, and here you can see a guy that's up in Lake Titicaca, which shows you the same reed boats made the exact same way, and the giant ones and the deal and everything. And you have to say, here we go with that convergence plan again, and it just seems a little bit too conspicuous. You can see where you can put two of them together here, and you can make just a huge houseboat out of this thing, right? And you put dragon heads on the end of them, and now we're starting to look like Phoenician trawlers, and now we're starting to look like Vikings, right? And you see things that look like this and ancient reed boat designs, and they had heads on them and stuff, and it looks very Viking-ish, if you will. And again, this is an actual one that's found in a tomb, and you can see it swell up in the way that it looks and its trawling ability. All of these, it's kind of amazing to see this type of, and you can see this guy here making these small ones, but look at the size of the bundle they end up making and the giant ones they can create. And again, here we have it, reed boats in Sumerians. That's where it originates from, and they had these things way back God knows when. There's tales of Enki and his Magellan boat that sailed all the way up the Euphrates and would go up into his mountain homeland and stuff. So a lot of interesting correlation that goes along with this. But yeah, traces of cannabis, cocoa, and tobacco in Ramses the Great. He was great, wasn't he? Amazing. And they were these people that found the first medicines and things too, so it goes along with it quite well. And we're just going to finish off here towards the end with the story here after Pitcairn Islands and the diving in the boats and so on. And so they know that this predates prior to Columbus's first voyage of the Americas, and their research paper, Scientific Evidence for Pre-Columbian Transatlantic Voyages, explains all the plant species we were talking about before, and that it must be transatlantic voyages and so on. Such controversial scientific findings, though, contradict accepted notions of the plausible dates associated with mankind being able to do this. And but as the authors insist, our growing knowledge of early maritime technology and its accomplishments gives us confidence that vessels and nautical skills capable of these long-distance travels were developed by the times indicated and shown in the record itself. The presence of anomalous maps in elder days only serves to reinforce the notion transoceanic travel was done long in the past. In my old map series, I showed you this exact here map, and this is Piri Reis's map, and it shows you the side of Africa here and an elephant and so on, and the Pillars of Hercules coming out, and it shows you all the Americas over here. Now, it's really only supposed to have been made in some circa 1513, but in 1492, no one had really gotten back yet to even put this all together. And he said he did it from ancient source maps. People aren't putting two and two together, but they show you they've already got cattle over here at the time. There's ships off the coast. There's a guy standing right here that doesn't have a head on him. He's got a mouth in the middle of his stomach. There's a dragon down here. And there's all these ships that are here, and they show you part of the Antarctic coast. And whenever you watch like Ancient Aliens and stuff, they'll show you they knew about the Antarctic coast. So this probably went back to before the Ice Age, and therefore it was aliens, and stuff. But what they're never putting together is the idea that no, look, we've been here. We've been here before. We've been here before. A little bit before that is this is some lost knowledge that's kind of gone. And that's the Piri Reis map, Ottoman admiral that was there. based on older maps, though. And so, yeah, Ramses the Great and the expulsion into the area, all these ancient stories. And again, we're talking about cocaine mummies and how she had found them by just doing a forensic test onto them. Well, actually, the lady Lescott had found before, and then Babalova decided to look into it and see, okay, what does it test out for? And of course, her being a forensic pathologist, she tested for the spectrum that she tests for whenever somebody dies, so you can tell if they died from some kind of weird cocaine overdose or God knows what's going on. And wow, this man right here, Ramses, he popped pretty hot on it. This pale leucoderm king known as Ramses the Great. Anyhow, guys, like, share, and subscribe, and enjoy. More coming your way. More containing this reed boat concept, too, and how the Sumerians and trade ran, and what Mary means as far as the ocean and maritime and mariculture. Peace.